All right, so this is for the Advancing Informal STEM Learning AISL program. And then one thing we wanted to stress at the outset is that this is a program of the Division of Research on Learning in Formal and Informal Environments. And that's those words are in red because both research and learning are highly important to this program. Next slide. And I think Tony's going to take it from here.
Yeah, I'll take it from here. Thank you, Layla. So the AISL solicitation has 6 priority goals. And so for today's session, we're just going to be focusing on that enhancing knowledge building. And all AISL projects are expected to build knowledge. And that means that all proposals must make a strong case for how the project advances the knowledge base of informal STEM learning and the informal STEM learning field more widely. And they can do this through both the theoretical and empirical or evidence-based justification for a proposed project. So you really want to clearly articulate what, and the solicitation says you must clearly articulate the theoretical and empirical justification for the project. And the project should build from the current literature and practice, and may also build from relevant research agendas or literatures about informal STEM learning that have been developed in recent years. So the literature review should really inform the proposed project. And one thing I want to highlight here is that CAISE has done an amazing job on informalscience.org collecting many of these literature reviews or these knowledge bases. So and also the projects that have been funded through AISL. So it's a really good spot to start or to continue identifying how you're building and enhancing knowledge building in this field. Next slide, Jamie, please. So there are common strategies to enhancing knowledge building. And in AISL especially, this can happen through research, evaluation, or a combination of research and evaluation. And it can focus on developing, testing, or implementing innovative research, innovative models, or resources, or tools for informal learning environments. So that's a lot of ors. It's a pretty open solicitation as far as if it's learning in informal spaces, learning with choice and agency. So if it's informal STEM learning, there are many areas that are of interest to generating knowledge, and many areas of STEM are included in that. So to enhance knowledge building, the focus of investigations can include things like what's happening, or what happens when, or to what extent is something being experienced or understood, etc. Why is it happening? How is it happening? What works for whom? And under what circumstances? There are others, this isn't an exhaustive list, but these are the kinds of questions that really get at that knowledge building component. And the intended findings of investigation should be compelling to the field at large. So this goes back to that, look at the prior literature, everything that's listed on CAISE of what's been done and what's being done. Where is there a really good spot to push, and what's kind of saturated, or what's maybe too, where is there energy, where can we add, how can we grow together? Next slide, please, Jamie. So learning, as Layla was saying, this is the Advancing Informal STEM Learning, and it's the Division of Research on Learning. And the AISL program recognizes the complexities of measuring STEM learning in informal environments. We use the term measuring really broadly. We aren't speaking of specifically to quantitative approaches, but really to broader ways of measuring or characterizing learning phenomena. And so that could be quantitative, qualitative, or some mixed measures approach. It can be, as the bottom bullet says, really innovative and exploratory ways to measure. knowledge and learning across these environments. So it's just, we get that it's not a school system, that it's a very, very complex learning environment, and that we get to be creative in how we study that and what we mean by learning. And proposals must describe the measures of learning outcomes. So again, measures don't mean quantitative, but it must be very clear what you intend to do to see if learning is occurring or not. And what you have to be clear in defining what you mean by learning and why. And that includes for the target audience, like who is doing the learning, and does that make sense for the group that does how you're measuring learning make sense for the group you're measuring or studying or working with. And that includes how the measures are chosen and why they're appropriate, as I was saying, and whether they're practical in this space. We really care about not turning our spaces into formal education, but really highlighting the informal aspect even in the measurement approach. But again, back to the basics. The proposals must include a description of the measurement of learning outcomes. Okay, next slide, please, Jane. So we wanted to share some items that have come up as areas of concern in proposals. Here we're calling them mistakes, but they're not really mistakes. They're more like areas that if they're not clearly addressed in the proposal, it makes it difficult for reviewers to assess the project's feasibility or merit. So we're highlighting these because they happen a lot, and we want you to know about these areas because they're the most common area or place for improvement in proposals, especially as related to knowledge building. Okay, next one, Jamie. Okay, so often proposals do not clearly demonstrate the potential contribution to informal STEM learning. So there's not like a roadmap to impact. We are curious about this, but then what does that do for the field, and what do you think that will do down the road? Layla or Jamie, next one.
Another thing we see come up quite a bit is project descriptions will have an insufficient description of prior related work. And this is really critical because reviewers, while they have areas of expertise, that are the reasons that we brought them in to review a slate of proposals, they might not have full knowledge of your area. And so it really behooves you to make clear to them, what is known and what is not known in the specific domain that you're trying to investigate, so that they can, feel comfortable and confident that the kinds of knowledge building you're trying to accomplish are addressing something that hasn't already been, retreaded a bunch of times. Next one, Jamie.
So another one that comes up is that there isn't a theoretical framework being used to guide the project or the research or evaluation. And oftentimes the theoretical framework is at the beginning, but it doesn't get carried through the project. Your theoretical framework can help you make decisions about how you're going to collect the data, how you're going to sample, what kinds of data you're using, what kinds of how you're interpreting the results. So just really thinking of that theoretical framework as the backbone of the proposal that each part plays off of. And that can really help bring cohesion and also help address how you're adding to enhancing knowledge building through a proposal. Next one, Jamie.
This is a big one. If there's an unclear research question, that can cause the entire proposal to fall apart, because oftentimes what you're trying to do as a reviewer is take a look at the proposed work, the proposed evaluation or research plan, and map that back to the research question. And if that research question is too vague, it's like standing on shifting sand, and it can be very hard to review a proposal fairly. So for that, I would just urge you to think back to the earlier slide that Tony was presenting, where she was suggesting some of the common foci of investigations. What is happening, to what extent, why, how, things like that. Does your research question ask, is it framed around a clear area that you're trying to explore in that way. Next point.
So this one's related to what Layla was saying, but in this term, the research question is too broad, or there are too many research questions. This comes up a lot. There's so many interesting things to find out, but you have to be able to describe how you're measuring it and how you're going to choose your participants and how you're going to recruit them and how and why for each of those pieces and how you're going to analyze it and who's going to be involved with that and why for each of those pieces again. And so if you have too much going on, you can't get into the details. And again, you get back into that. There's not enough detail for the reviewers to assess the merit or the feasibility. So just thinking about not too many research questions or not a research question that's so broad that it's anything would be a result or anything, or you can't answer it at all. Next one, Jamie.
Okay, so a methodology or research plan that has insufficient detail or clarity. So this is a thing that, you know, as proposal writers, we all struggle with. You only have a certain number of pages. And I think all of us have gotten reviews, even when we've won grants, that have said, gosh, we want more detail on X, Y, Z. So, you know, what constitutes enough detail? You know, that's, you know, there's an art to it. But I would say that, you know, you certainly don't want to leave your reviewers wondering, you know, who your population of interest is and how you're going to find them, meet them, recruit them. You want to give a sense of, you know, how many folks you might be working with, what kinds of contacts, you know, the extent and duration of the contacts you'd have with the participants in your research. And then, you know, to the extent that, you know, you are explaining your methodology, is the methodology clear? You know, if you're developing a new measure, you might have to explain that in a little bit more detail than an existing measure. And, you know, when that gets administered and how that gets translated into knowledge. Those are all really helpful things. You know, help people see the through line and imagine how this is going to take place. Don't leave them wondering, you know, when, where, how, and who. Next point.
So you'll see these are grouped together because they're so intertwined that it's actually hard to talk about one without the other. So this one is that there is often a misalignment with the measures and the research question. And that gets back to what Layla was saying at the beginning, this like shifting sand that you're on. But it's often one of the questions is, can the measure actually, and the outcomes of the measure, the analysis actually answer the question that is being posed? And so if the question is too broad that you can't make sense of that, or if the question is shifting throughout the proposal, by the time we get to the measures, it might not be clear that that's the best measure or a useful measure for getting at the actual question you're asking. And then the last one, Jamie.
Yeah, and I alluded to this with my last point. So, you know, proposals sometimes fail to identify appropriate audiences for the research results and dissemination plans. So when you're trying to construct a research question, there's always an implicit, you know, who it is that you're talking to, who it is that these results matter to. Sometimes it's researchers, sometimes it's practitioners, sometimes it's both. And you know, again, don't leave your reviewers guessing. Make it clear, you know, what body of literature or what body of practical knowledge you're trying to add to with these results. Don't let the reviewers infer it. Otherwise, they might infer the wrong thing and judge your proposal poorly as a consequence. So help the reviewers better understand, you know, who it is you're speaking to and whether what you're proposing to say is appropriate for that audience. I think we're ready for the next slide. Okay, so we just gave you a list of things that can go wrong. Well, here is a set of tools that might help you make sure they go right. We find ourselves saying this a lot in our responses to PIs, that boy, this was an interesting proposal and had all these merits, but it really would have been improved if you had thought to construct something like, you know, a logic model or a design conjecture map or so on and so forth. There are lots of tools out there, and we're not prescribing any particular one, but lots of tools that you can use to help you write, a proposal that is coherent and all the parts sort of, align with one another very well, and also, communicate that then to the reviewers. So, we do not require that a proposal contains something like a logic model or a theory of change or a design conjecture map or a data table. But we do strongly recommend that, even if this isn't something you show to us in the proposal, your team tries your hand at developing one behind the scenes, because that's really going to help you confront questions you might not know were there embedded in your narrative, and structure it in a way that has this clarity and this alignment that we've been calling for. So, for example, it can help you align your research questions with the prior work, because if these methods force you to sort of state what your innovation actually is, and as you're writing it down, you might recognize, well, this isn't as innovative as I thought, or maybe I need to surface a nuance about this to really emphasize where the innovation is taking place. It certainly helps you articulate the theory that's at play, and how the innovations you're trying are derived from that theory. That's important for knowledge building. It shows, as you're plotting this out, how the innovations and the claims you're making about potential outcomes are supported by methods. So this is what Tony was mentioning just a moment ago, that it's really important that, the methods you choose are aligned with the research questions. Can you answer your questions with your methods? That would seem to be a relatively straightforward proposition, but as you get into writing a proposal, especially if there are lots of partners, it can get pretty confused, because lots of researchers are used to methods that they're comfortable with, and, things get sort of Frankenstein together. And so a logic model can help you and your team keep these things clear. It certainly helps you plan out the scope of work that you're planning to do to address the claims. So, there are often, research questions that require a huge amount of work to answer them. Some research questions only require a smaller amount of work. That degree of work does need to be communicated to your reviewer population so that they can assess your research plan appropriately. It helps you with, and this is very important, the scope of the claims that you're going to make. So, the claims you're making are the knowledge building. This is what we think we will know or understand or be able to illuminate as a consequence of this work. And, I see a lot of proposals where they either undersell or oversell their claims, and both of those things can be bad. If you undersell what you're planning on doing, the reviewers might not pick up on what's really innovative and possibly transformative about what you're doing. Do crow about that if you're doing something that is trying something very new. On the other hand, if you oversell your claims, that can sour reviewers pretty quickly, because you're leading them to expect that you're going to get outcomes that are really tremendous, and then as they read into the proposal, they realize, oh, we're not going to get those answers at all. We're only going to get a fraction of those answers, and it can turn what would otherwise be a perfectly acceptable proposal into a rejection, unfortunately. And logic models are very helpful for setting the not just the scope of the work itself, but the scope of the impacts, whether they are immediate, sometimes called proximal impacts, or distal or far away impacts. And, that's, crucial for us to understand, when Tony was talking about the roadmap for the impact on ISL, this can help you articulate that. So I think that's everything.